tēnā koutou katoa. Kia Elder Gary Salt, Māori and Indigenous, Whatea Tahu, tēnā wā, tēnā koe. Kia Amos, tēnā koe. He mihi tēnei ki o koutou maanga, ngā awa, ngā moana, me maroto, mai ngā moana me ngā awa o tōku iwi, o Ngāti Kahungungu, Ngāti tō Rangatira, Ngai Tahu, Ngāti Hine. Hoi ana mo he mihi mahana ki a tātou katoa, ngā tama te takitake o ngā hauewha, e hui mai nei I tēnei wā. Engari, e hui tino whakahehe ki a tātou. First of all, I want to acknowledge and give thanks to the Wenda Open Strongly Anishinaabe in Mississauga, on whose lands we are gathered for this conference. And I bring greetings from my tribes of Ngāti Kahungungu, Ngāti tō Rangatira, Ngai Tahu, and Ngāti Hine. I also bring these wishes from distinguished Professor Graham Smith, who would have liked to have been here today. He got me instead. I especially want to thank Sandra for initiating the conference and the International Consortium of Indigenous Educators and the team of the organisation and were involved in the monthly meetings I hardly ever make. And was 10 years times of my meetings. And organising this conference, Indigenous Resurgence and Transformation in Education. I'm honoured to be here and the opportunity to share some of my thoughts on the conference theme. I didn't have PowerPoint. Oh, okay. Okay. That's me. That's where I will rest when I die. That's where my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents have laid in the house. As I grew up, you can't see where the house is behind. I grew up there underneath my mama, so it's nice to see it up here. I want to begin by referencing Graham Smith in terms of our context in Aotearoa, which may resonate with many gathered here today. And I quote, "We cannot have a sustainable socio-economic revolution within Māori communities without a prior and simultaneous education revolution. Such a revolution must build on our own models of transformation that appropriately respond to our aspirations to engage the whole world while simultaneously growing our cultural and iwi citizenship responsibilities." Apologies, I keep coming in there my own language with iwi for our tribe. Means bones. Over the past 2 decades, I'm a trained primary school teacher, but for the last 2 decades, a lot of my work in education has been responding to my community, my tribal aspirations, such as developing tribal education plans, co-constructing cultural standards between the local tribes and mainstream school communities as the basis for the development of place-based and land-based curricula. That was a major innovation for many of these schools, and that was the inclusion of our language, our tribal knowledge, what we're prepared to give out to schools, the history, our customs, and our values. Within the academy, my attention has focused on the provision of Māori language immersion in teacher education in partnership with Māori communities across Aotearoa. A critical factor in this work has been an understanding the nature of the struggle of unequal power when we centre Indigenous cultural imperatives at the core of our work in the academy. in response to our community aspirations. I draw on my experiences of developing and co-constructing 2 Māori centres, as our word for it is kaupapa Māori. 2 kaupapa Māori immersion ITE programs in partnership with the Kura kaupapa Māori community. Te runga o ngā Kura kaupapa Māori. For the mouthful of you all, but I'll just refer to it as runga today. Ideas are reflected in a book I co-edited with Sandra and others, entitled Indigenous Education, New Directions and Varied Practice, which captures some of the work of Indigenous scholars in theory, knowledge, practice and research in higher education institutions in Canada, Aotearoa, Hawaii, and the United States. A salient theme authors press is the persistent struggle for the inclusion of Indigenous languages, knowledge, values, and worldviews in public education systems. In higher education, Māori scholar Leone Hihana argues the university is a site of struggle where Indigenous and minority group scholars have created spaces where radical thinking is engaged and developed. There is an expectation that teaching and research will be couched within theoretical frameworks and disciplines that historically served to provide a platform for the oppression of Indigenous peoples. Dr. Dwayne McDonald challenges the ideological nature of the official curriculum of higher education, whereby the education priorities such curricula emphasises are imbued with the cultural assumptions and prejudices that the majority of the members of the society have come to consider normal and necessary for young people to know and understand. What is required is to reimagine curriculum by honouring other ways to be human, drawn from the wellspring of Indigenous knowledge, for example, in consult with local Indigenous communities and their knowledge holders. Restall and Ngāti argue that to indigenise curriculum is, and I quote, to contest ideological territory and to incite a battle that erupts in mainstream teacher education classrooms across the country. Attempts to indigenise institutions of higher education include holding to account institutional responsibilities and the role of helping Indigenous aspirations and the goals of higher education through such things as student services that focused on Indigenous student success. And while there is a growing body of positive Indigenous initiatives in education, what's not so well documented are comparative studies of strategic initiatives. This includes the different layers of unseen barriers that continue to challenge Indigenous educational ideas and practices in higher ed, from the standpoint of the relationship between institutions and their Indigenous communities. As Dr. Sandra Stiles maintains, the current crisis in Indigenous education is a result of our experiences of, and I quote, intense struggles and challenges requiring important decisions to be made in collaboration with Indigenous communities and universities. Dr. Māori argues that education has played a central role in the process of schooling for a democracy through Budaya, a Greek term that, and I quote, refers to the educational act of moulding an ideal citizen who has a mature, broad outlook on life, involving the training of physical and mental faculties within a particular cultural context through disciplines, which is as much a political act as it is an educational act. But at what price to the Indigenous psyche over time? My recent Fulbright study explored the nature of community engagement with the Academy in Hawaii and Montana, and it echoes Professor Ngāi's point here. Laws that claim equality have little to no impact on the day-to-day systemic racism, racial, economic, and anti-marginalised violence in society experienced by, in the case of Hawaii, Native Hawaiian faculty and students. The challenges facing Indigenous academics in terms of offering Indigenous-led programs and courses relevant to Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing are similar. However, not all relations within the academy are the same, but strained by the functions of institutional racism, hegemony, and the domestication of the native. As with my experience in Aotearoa, the co-option and domestication of Indigenous academics is a major impediment to Indigenous development within the academy. Among findings from Hawaii and Montana for Indigenous people generally were their limited access to higher ed, intergenerational trauma, which remains prevalent, economic impacts of colonisation and forced resettlement, and a persistent assimilationist agenda that undermines community academy partnerships. The context within which, any acts of transforming and resurgence in Indigenous education is highly political. Historically, Māori have had little say in decisions that helped shape education and schooling in Aotearoa. This is despite the fact that the uptake of New World technologies of my ancestors in the early years of the 19th century led to high literacy levels among tribes that resulted in the proliferation of tribal newspapers, large-scale economic ventures in trade, industry, and shipping, which drove the New Zealand economy at the time. This is in the mid-19th century. However, the dimensions of internal colonisation perpetrated by dominant settler societies that beset Indigenous communities elsewhere, such as here in Canada, also curtailed Māori prosperity. Such dimensions are referring to include population decline through introduced diseases, wars, and state policies, the usurpation of customary cause of government through various systems of assimilation that resulted. We know all of that. You've heard it all before. In Aotearoa, the Treaty of Waitangi, or Te Treaty of Waitangi, we're referring to the version written in the Māori language, which was signed by most tribes. The Māori version was signed by most tribes and is recognised in international law. It was one such agreement reached in 1840 between Māori leaders, both men and women, and the British Crown. The treaty gave permission for British entry and settlement, and ceded the responsibilities of governance to the Crown, which Māori tribes continued to maintain sovereignty over their lands and resources. In terms of relations of cooperation, treaties are covenant between parties, ostensibly to act in good faith towards one another in the future governance of the nation. Until the mid-1980s, the treaty was really honoured by the successive governments or by the New Zealand courts, but it has remained a critical political reference for Māori. It is the founding covenant and a key domestic human rights instrument which Māori consult in the pursuit of social justice in education and other social and economic imperatives, and for holding the government accountable politically and morally. So we see ourselves as treaty people in the first instance. The incorporation of treaty principles into legislation in New Zealand law effectively gives the principles the same binding force as any other statutory law. In education, The Māori Language Act 1987 recognised the Māori language as a treasure and subsequently declared the Māori language an official language of New Zealand. It was the first. English wasn't official, they realised at that time. The Māori Education Act of 1989 enabled the establishment of a range of alternative Māori education providers, in particular Māori language immersion preschools, Kahungungu, elementary schools, Kura, secondary schools, Kura, and Māori-centred tertiary education providers, the Rangatira. All of which were initiated by Māori, for Māori, and outside of the state. The recent Education and Training Act of 2020 was a rewrite of education legislation giving effect to the Labour government's plan to transform the education system. To do this by addressing, among other things, the education agency's obligations under Te Treaty. This includes greater specificity around what those education agencies must do to be treaty compliant. For example, school boards of trustees must give effect by working to ensure their plans, policies and local curriculum reflect local tīwhanga Māori, mātauranga Māori and te ao Māori. That's customs, knowledge and Māori work. Taking all reasonable steps to make instruction available in the Māori language and achieving equitable outcomes for Māori students. However, since the new right-wing coalition government led by the New Zealand National Party came to power last year, we have seen a rapid unveiling of the positive inroads to Crown Māori relations generally, and in recognising the treaty principles, legislation and policy documents in particular. The government's anti-treaty stance has resulted in dozens of policies that provide for Māori now under review or repealed, halting all so-called race-based policies and minimising the use of Māori language in the public service. This kind of rhetoric mirrors the justifications perpetuated by successive government policies since the 19th century and well into the closing years of the 20th century. For example, in 2008, the then Conservative leader of the National Opposition Party, Dr. Donald Brash, led the white backlash and political opportunism by perpetuating an illusion of Māori privilege and championing a policy of erasure. He called for the elimination of race-based policies, those are policies based on equity and justice, in favour of a needs-based, one law for all approach. The fallacy of race-based as a categorisation obscures the genuine concerns of Māori and other non-Māori who are experts in education and health and social policy. Labelling equity-based policies and programs as race-based confuses race with ethnicity rather than seeing such programs as a systematic approach to focusing on Māori as a subject. Furthermore, it deflects attention from the facts and ignores the extensive body of empirical evidence that highlights the link between ethnicity, poor health, and poor education outcomes. So Brash's policy of erasure served to obfuscate the reality of Māori people's lives by raising anti-Māori sentiment that increased non-Māori anxiety and feelings of insecurity and hysteria against Māori resurgence and assertiveness. A major consequence was the Labour government's political expediency in appeasing the populace by supporting Brash's policy and introducing the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi deletion bill, where all references to the Treaty of Waitangi legislation would be removed. In fact, It was a move seen to preempt the bill that all references to the treaty were removed from the new draft curriculum for schools released in 2006. The principles were only reinstated following widespread concern among Māori leaders, other New Zealand leaders, complaints to government, and strong feedback and submissions to the Ministry of Education. The latest move by the New Zealand coalition government is an attempt to nullify and redefine the treaty and its principles, and framing the treaty as outdated, racist, and divisive. However, from a Māori community perspective, it's always been about balance. A promise between two peoples to take the best possible care of each other. That is as relevant today as it was when it was signed in 1840. The emphasis on all citizens being equal obscures the fact that there are differences in being equal, where we all have a right to education in English as the colonising language and as the treaty partner. Māori have a right to education in the Māori language, especially when English and Māori are of equal status as official languages. Māori communities put a lot of emphasis on collective rights rather than individual rights. As Māori educationist and fellow tribesman Bill Hamilton maintains, and I quote, "We all have equal rights, and how they're expressed are different depending on culture," a perspective that is never adequately explained. The notion of Māori privilege is still being touted by our present coalition politicians and their followers. It's difficult to understand what is meant by Māori privilege when all social indicators show Māori are the least privileged in education, in health, the justice system, household income, housing, and participation in local government and boards. Within the New Zealand tertiary sector, this is the political context within which the right to education that prepares graduate teachers for Māori language immersion schools, Kura for Māori, and our attempts to transform initial teacher education within the academy has been played out over the last 15 years. An academy where in 2016 the senior leadership adopted the idea of being articulating-led university. And despite the highly charged political climate and sensitivities around coalition government's expectations that state-funded institutions adhere to a program of Te Tiriti Reija, the senior leadership recently confirmed their ongoing commitment to being Te Tiriti-led. The context within which change that benefits Indigenous education development within the academy faces multiple challenges that most often mirror wider societal biases, prejudice, and systemic racism based on complex layers of ignorance. The determined, impoverished, normative, and privileged forms of ignorance we encounter that are hostile to Indigenous perspectives on the production, dissemination, and determinants of what counts as knowledge. By ignorance, I'm not referring to more than not knowing simple facts or prejudicial behaviour, but rather as non-knowing, where race plays a determining role. It is the kind of non-knowing that underpins erasure in the grand narrative of a civilising and colonial history. Our knowledge, our achievements, our histories, the usurpation of our forms of government, social systems, and languages, to name a few. The various forms and patterns of ignorance embedded within the complex terrain of the academy when taken together, constitute an epistemology of ignorance. In order to make a difference, to influence change, the challenge is to understand how an epistemology of ignorance is actively produced, sustained, and how we recognise and counter them. The other challenge, and the more pressing, comes from our communities. In my case, the Māori language immersion schooling community of Kura for Māori. One of the most confronting issues is one of teacher supply. The challenge we confronted is how to train teachers specifically for immersion schools for Kura for Māori through the medium of the Māori language within the academy. Up until 2010, there were no initial teacher education programs in Aotearoa explicitly aimed at the preparation of graduates for the Kura for Māori system. We've got two systems in Aotearoa as well, the English media system and the Māori medium. What the Kura for Māori community wanted was a program purposely designed to meet their needs and aspirations, and which encompassed the philosophy of Kura for Māori called Te Ahu Matua. It's the only philosophy in education come out of Aotearoa. This meant a whole new and innovative approach to constructing a program, including curriculum to be taught. The only way we could achieve this was through the Academy agreeing to a formal community partnership with the governing body of Kura for Māori, Te Runa Inui. The major reason was that all of the knowledge holders of Kura for Māori education provision, including some of the architects of the system, were located as principals and senior leaders in Kura across the country. They understand the nature of teaching in an immersion Kura for Māori environment, where Māori is the language of instruction. In the Māori world, our knowledge, customs, and values are normal and taken for granted. Children enter Kura with the cultural capital of the school, fluent in the Māori language, and the school habitus is commensurate with their homes. The challenge we faced was how to initiate a novel Māori-centred ITE program in a Euro-centric institution that is not only structured on the values, standards, ethics, and aspirations of the dominant group, but which emulates elite institutions in Europe and North America, where Eurocentric organisational systems, bureaucracies, and modus operandi are embedded at every level of the institution. The community members of the Rungana were sceptical that a marriage with a Eurocentric institution could be achieved, and a kaupapa Māori ITE program could be co-constructed and offered in partnership with them. They viewed the academy as an unsafe space for Māori students and for offering an education that prepares graduates for the very system set up in opposition to the damaging effects of mainstream education on the Māori psyche, as Mark has argued. The passage of the new program, Te Ahu Tātai, through the institutional bureaucracy was confronted by fierce opposition of some senior academic leaders, the skewed institutional lenses of white administrators, and their oftentimes aggressive attempts to block, derail, undermine, and marginalise Indigenous knowledge. Such oppositional barriers is a way of cultivating ignorance that is socially produced and distributed systematically and legitimated by making it rationally pervasive. This is what happens when the complacent luxury of ignorance is disrupted, when the privilege of not knowing works against marginalised communities. It is how structures, institutional and administrative, reinforce ignorance, and where in some cases, ignorance can take precedence. At the very root of the problem is the fact that Indigenous-centred programs promulgate knowledge that is really sanctioned, confirmed, validated, and verified as authoritative, and a mistaken perception regarding the relative superiority of Eurocentric standards to measure Indigenous programs assumed and preconceived as inferior. The institution underestimated how knowledgeable or knowing Indigenous academics need to be to counter the antagonistic systems of the academy towards Indigenous aspirations in order to maintain unequal power relations. I've written elsewhere a more detailed account of the academy as a contested space for the provision of a kaupapa Māori ITE program. Suffice to say that where it should have taken a year to complete the administrative committee processes of accreditation, it took 2 years of strategizing, both inside the institution and in partnership with the community. It should be 14. In collaboration with the community, several key principles informed our conference strategy. So it might be the next one. The first principle was formalising a partnership with the Rangatira, that is the leaders of the Kaupapa Māori community, which gave access to the small pool of expert practitioners leading the field as adjunct lecturers. There was no precedent set anywhere in Aotearoa for this collaborative partnership and combined experience in the provision of an ITE program. The partnership allowed for a high level of authenticity and the co-construction of the program between the academy and the Runa, from the conceptual design, the development of new courses, the selection processes for entry, and contributed to teaching in mixed mode, online and in person. The university's partnership with Te Rūnanga has served to strengthen the reputation of the institution and is central to the credibility of the program as far as the Kaupapa Māori community is concerned. Without our partnership, the university has no credibility. And overall, it has also been a pragmatic approach to delivering Kaupapa Māori immersion ITE within the academy as a positive solution to teacher supply in the Kaupapa Māori system. We provide the majority of graduate teachers for Kaupapa across the country. Another principle was that of national access and participation. The mixed online modality and block course delivery options provides access to students located anywhere in Aotearoa. This allows greater participation without the need for students to relocate, but to remain within the supportive environments of their families. And this has enabled us to build strong tribal and community links through opportunities for teachers from these settings to contribute as adjunct staff. In the main, students don't want to come from the north, they want to stay in their own communities. And that is what this partnership allowed us to do. We started on a practice-based approach. Once students are selected onto the program, they're all assigned to a support school we call Kura Hāpai. Kura Hāpai volunteered to host students for the duration of their training, thereby providing the benefits of a professional and whānau family-centred environment. Most of the students are alumni of their Kura Hāpai. Some Kura Hāpai sponsor a student from the community, providing the student meets all the criteria for entry. We did that without letting the New Zealand Teaching Council know that we allowed our communities to choose and select students to come into the program rather than the other way around, because they know best who they want to teach in their own schools and in their community. So we did that for a number of years. Students are given access in these kura, in their Kura Hāpai, students are given access to computer and video conferencing facilities in some instances, and receive professional support from teaching staff in the schools. This arrangement is a key to practice-based delivery model, which has ensured the retention of students studying at a distance. Fourth principle is that of the philosophy of Te Aho Matua. Te Aho Matua is the philosophical foundation of Kura Kaupapa Māori. It is the only philosophy, as I said, to come out of Aotearoa. And from the outset, we decided that if the new ITE program delivered out of the university was to prepare graduate teachers for Kura Kaupapa, it was then necessary to embed the philosophy Te Aho Matua within the curriculum. The main goal being to orient students in their development as graduate teachers and in their preparation for teaching in Kura Kaupapa settings. An underlying assumption of Te Aho Matua is that quality teaching occurs when teachers are self-aware and critically reflective of their practice and role within the kura, with the learners, with families, with the tribe, and within global contexts. The curriculum design of Te Aho Tātarangi is framed within the philosophy of Te Aho Matua, and as such, we are the only ITE provider in Aotearoa to offer a program based on the philosophy of Te Aho Matua. Imagine that. A major emphasis was the provision of full Māori language immersion, extending Māori language to a high level of proficiency. We are therefore mindful that the preparation of graduate teachers includes kaupapa Māori pedagogical practices that also take account of tribal variances in dialect, in customs, and traditions that are practiced within the schools. Throughout their training, students are exposed to a range of Māori language experts, teaching professionals, and linguists. Another was the idea of quality and excellence. It is important that what counts as quality and excellence in the provision of ITE from a kaupapa Māori community point of view was prioritised. So we decided to set up a board of studies, and they were a group of elders from across the country, recognised and considered experts in Māori language. Their role was about quality assurance and excellence, but they're also there to oversee and keep an eye on the institution. Another principle is that of staff capacity and capability. One of the things that I wanted was not, I was trained in the mainstream. I never taught in Kura Kaupapa, and I don't have the skills to be able to do that. So what I wanted for this program was teachers who had experienced what it was to teach in a Kura Kaupapa. I didn't want anyone who had not taught, because the Kura Kaupapa schools, immersion schools, are not reproductions of mainstream schools. They're in and of themselves, embedded in the Māori word. And we recently welcomed our first graduate of Kura Kaupapa as a fellow colleague, known since he was a baby. Now he's my colleague. Our further initiative was to embed an academic support advisor, and that was important as well. Someone who had been in Kura, who could advise on academic support, because we have to be able to do that throughout the country. It's not as big as Canada. The provision of a kaupapa Māori IT program is really labour intensive for the faculty who carry a heavy workload. But the way we look at it is that we are not only preparing students for a career in teaching, much more importantly, we're preparing them for a way of life. They will go back to their own, they'll have their own areas, they will live amongst their kin, they will be involved deeply in their communities from birth to death, that whole gamut. So it's really important that we all understand that that's a major role. My leadership role as a non-experienced teacher of Kura Kaupapa Māori has been be to engage in the sometimes rough and tumble politics of kaupapa Māori IT provision with university administrators, bureaucrats, officials of the Ministry of Education, New Zealand Tertiary Education Council, and New Zealand Teaching Council. So I get to do all that waiting over there with the powers that be to allow the staff to just get on with the main job of teaching our students. Puerto Rican scholar, so another principle is co-provided teaching and learning environment. Puerto Rican scholar, artist and poet Antonia Dada wrote, and I quote, "The university today exists as a disturbing battleground where ideas and practices can easily degenerate into a nightmare of undemocratic repression and bureaucratic madness." This was our experience that led to a major decision to relocate the program and the teaching staff to the School of Māori Studies and out of the College of Education. This decision was to ensure that best interests of staff and students, our relationship with the community and the restorations were assured. Leading the passage of the programs through the uncompromising demands of the university bureaucracy, its administration systems and the approval process, confirmed the need to seek refuge in the safe haven of a high-performing, multidisciplinary, kaupapa Māori-driven research and teaching environment. An environment where speaking Māori language, our customs and values are the norm, and where the expectation is that our work as Indigenous academics contribute to the aspirations of our communities. I mentioned earlier that the university confirmed its commitment to being Tiriti-led. Should be number 15. While the notion of Tiriti is a work in progress in terms of what it means in practice, as there remains much confusion in that regard, as an organising concept, it has provided useful leverage in ensuring that our attempts to respond to community tribal aspirations are not thwarted or undermined by managerial imperatives and fiscally driven priorities of a corporatised university. As Dada maintains regarding the exercise of power and privilege in the academy, and I quote, "Emancipatory struggles for social justice has resulted in economic policies and practices in higher ed that wittingly or unwittingly reproduce racialised structures and relationships, despite rhetorical claims to the contrary. Universities across Aotearoa currently face a severe tightening of the financial belt due to, among other things, a reduction in state funding and a dramatic drop in international student enrolments, resulting in large-scale staff layoffs, radical reductions in course offerings, and small-scale progress. Indigenous initiatives almost always fall into this latter category of being too small and therefore uneconomical, and are therefore at risk. They're at risk of being discontinued on fiscal grounds. Transformative notions of Indigenous development tied to community aspirations can be so easily derailed by an aggressive and virulent economic ethos of the university. In our case, Tiriti-led aspirations of the universities provided some respite and an assurance that Māori-centred programs are protected and ring-fenced, at least for now. The challenge for Indigenous scholars at the interface of community-based transformation projects from within the academy is that we remain vigilant, alert and responsive to the changing face of neo-colonialism, colonisation and reforms. This is critical if our work is to be relevant to the aspirations of our communities. So in summary, in the meeting, our work of transforming education in the academy is inherently political, and you have experienced this all firsthand, I'm sure. Our work involves setting agendas, strategies, tactics, policies, relationship building and action in them to enable program implementation. The work focuses on changing the status quo and of shifting from reactive to proactive mode. It requires us drawing on our Indigenous knowledge as the basis of theorising our own Indigenous transforming experiences and histories. And it means developing and transforming ideas, legitimating our own spaces in what we do.